Vice Now, I am Dustin Baker. We are back for January 21st. We are about 3 months away from the NFL draft. That is on April 24th. Set your calendars. Let's see, 7 weeks away from free agency. That's right around the bend, relatively speaking. So we got to start thinking about this damn offseason because the Vikings lost a classic one and done in the postseason. In doing so, they ended up with the 24th draft pick this April, which is, I don't know if you consider it purgatory. It's not an ideal spot, but they do have some roster needs, which we're going to discuss momentarily. And the Vikings, of course, have, about $57 million to spend on free agents. That number shrunk from $70 million, which we kept talking about all year, because they signed a bunch of guys to futures contracts late last week. So here we are, checking in about $57 million, 24th overall pick, probably a compensatory third-round pick for Kirk Cousins' departure coming on the way, and then 2 fifth-rounders, one of them from the Zadarius Smith trade. So what I want to do with you guys and gals today, Tuesday, is go through some of the early options the Vikings have with their first pick. And this is going to go by position, long-term roster need, in my opinion. I will start off by saying, and I've mentioned this quite a few times since the trade for Dallas Turner in last year's draft, or the pick necessary to draft Dallas Turner with the Jaguars. I do kind of expect the Vikings to trade down to recoup some draft capital, maybe snowball it into 2 trades, because right now they have the smallest amount of draft capital among NFL teams in this draft because they spent a miniature version of the farm on Dallas Turner. So we will look at this as if they're going to pick 24th, maybe throw in some caveats about what happens if they trade down. And then there's always the option, probably less likely because of Sam Darnold's stinkers in the final 2 games, that they could franchise tag and trade him and get a second or third rounder or something like that. So keep those in mind for hopefully accumulating draft capital. I'm going to go through these with the 24th pick and rank them, starting at the least likely of what I think can happen, all the way up to what I think will happen. So let's start at the bottom of the list. And this one is a long shot, but I have to throw it out there. Running back at pick number 24, I think is reasonably in play, and we'll be able to tell how they handle free agency, what their running back plan is. Now, there are free agents. Aaron Jones himself is a free agent who could re-sign with the Vikings, but that doesn't prevent the team from going ahead and drafting a rookie also. This class of running backs and free agency isn't quite like last year's, where you had these titans of industry like Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs switching teams. But there are guys like Javonte Williams, who I still think is pretty good, that could end up in Minnesota. But the reason that I have running back on this list at all is we are still very, very early in the draft buildup. And right 1 year ago right now, I'm not kidding, J.J. McCarthy in mock drafts was considered a second rounder. So we were looking at this thing thinking, all right, who can we get? Maybe we can even get McCarthy in the second round. The draft buildup is a very, very fluid process. So by the time we get to April, running backs outside of Ashton Jeanty could climb their way up at the end of the first round. So Ashton Jeanty, I don't think will be on the table for the Vikings. It's not really wise to trade up for a running back, and I don't think Jeanty gets past Dallas. He might even go to the Bears after the Ben Johnson signing. But there is a small chance that the guys after Ashton Jeanty, like Caleb Johnson, Iowa, and the dude you just watched last night, Judkins from Ohio State, Quinshin, there's a decent chance those guys get talked higher than their current draft stock, which is round 2 and round 3. And if that happens, this Vikings team needs a running back. We saw how great that was in the first 5-6 weeks of the season when Vikings were blowing teams out because Aaron Jones was cooking. He played every single game this year, bless his heart, and he was pretty darn good, generally speaking, but he did run out of gas, at least compared to the way he played in September. So I will pound the table for a running back somewhere in the draft. Probably not the first round because you don't need to necessarily spend that capital. But for full disclosure, there is a chance with the 24th pick that the Vikings either stick and pick or trade down a few spots and get somebody like Caleb Johnson or Quinshin Judkins, who just won a national championship last night. So running back is on this list just to be all-inclusive. The next one is interior offensive line. So this became the sexiest talker in the Vikings orbit after they surrendered an NFL record 9 sacks in the playoff loss against the Rams. It's also a very familiar talker for Vikings fans. during the Mike Zimmer era about why can't we just fix this damn offensive line. Well, the Vikings, for the most part, have made the offensive line a lot better than the Zimmer era, especially the end of the Zimmer era. It's just that the interior portion of it was exposed in the season's final 2 games. And when you have your head coach calling out that spot right after the game, emotions raw, saying we need to get better in the interior and protect our quarterback, whether that's J.J. McCarthy, hopefully, or Sam Darnold back on a whatever deal they might finagle with him. Interior offensive line was specifically name-dropped by Kevin O'Connell, so it's a reasonable expectation that they do something to fix it. Now, you might recall in Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's year-end press conference a week ago, he talked about how, I think he was talking about some of us fans, that he doesn't look at the NFL in a binary way that, if this happens, then that happens, and yes or no. For example, if the offensive line stunk against the Rams, well, that means we're getting all 3 new guys. That's not how the Vikings or most NFL teams look at the world. It could be developing what you already have and hoping that Blake Brandel takes the next step. On the whole, I do think they get some new personnel, but I caution us from thinking that, they're getting 3 new guys, 2 new guards and a center. That doesn't happen often in an offseason, especially for the Vikings. Nevertheless, if Kevin O'Connell makes good on his promise to improve the interior of the pocket, there are options. There is, Tyler Booker from Alabama. That would be probably a prime spot at 24 if the Vikings want to put their foot down and get a guard like that. There is Jonah Savaianaya from Arizona, I believe. He'll be in that probably early round 2 mix. Armand Mabu from Missouri, and then Donovan Jackson, Ohio State, who's become kind of all the rage because his team's in the national championship. So those are guys that between maybe picks 24 and 40, if you think a trade down is in play, that the offensive line could stand to improve in the interior, because always remember, I pretty much say this every show, the Vikings have the hard part figured out on the offensive line because you have Christian Darrisaw, who should be back hopefully at the beginning of the season in 2025, and Brian O'Neill, who is a mainstay of Vikings football. So, in terms of effectuating what Kevin O'Connell said about fixing the interior trenches offensively, it's a reasonable expectation that offensive line is on the docket for the draft. So keep that one in mind. The next one, second to last one, in fact, another thing I've asked for probably for 8 straight years, if I had to go back and listen to clips maybe longer. Interior defensive line should be on the menu for these Vikings. Why? Because they never opt to do anything splashy. It is always, we are going to go sign Jonathan Bullard. It's pretty good run stuffer. We're going to get Jamar Stephen. We're getting Armin Watts. It's always a mid solution to a problem where you look at these other teams like the Eagles, who are in the NFC Championship. They have too many. They have Milton Williams, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, and we don't have anything remotely close to that. There's Harrison Phillips, who's really, really awesome. But then it's just a bunch of guys who are either Jerry Tillery's. Now, Jalen Redmond looked great. I shouldn't slander his name. But the Vikings need an impact guy in the middle of the defense. So I put this draft need at number 2. And wouldn't you know it, there are guys that will be available in that section of the draft, between 20 and 40. Derek Harmon of Oregon. Shamar Stewart, Texas A&M. Walter Nolan, Ole Miss. I think he's been connected to the Vikings in some mock drafts. Tyleik Williams, Ohio State. Go figure. They're a team of the hour. And then, I don't know how to say his first name, Deani Walker from Kentucky. He's been a kind of a mock draft darling for the Vikings for about 3 months when the process started to get off the ground. But there are defensive line fixes. We need help in the interior, hopefully a guy who rushes the passer. I don't know if this will get fixed under Brian Flores. This is a guy who has a top 1, top 2, top 3 run defense without a nose tackle. But you would think before too long there's somebody in the Vikings organization that will tap the other guy on the shoulder and be like, hey, we can get a defensive tackle like the Eagles have. We should do that. And thankfully there are guys in this draft that could fit that mold in the Vikings pick range. It's just I will caution you against this. For some reason, interior defensive linemen take a little longer to develop when they get up to the NFL level. So, hey, if they drafted Walter Nolan, he may not be absolutely fantastic in year 1. It might take until year 3 until you saw him blossom. Kind of what's happening like with the Eagles guys right now. All right, the final one, and I fully expect the Vikings to spend a first-round pick, if they keep it, number 24, on a cornerback. We have been in this spot so many damn times over the last decade. A first-round pick that isn't really that sexy in the mid-teens or the 20s. And we're like, oh, which cornerback are the Vikings going to draft? Well, we are here again because they never draft the right guy. The last time they drafted good cornerbacks was Spielman and right before Zimmer, Xavier Rhodes in the 2013 NFL draft. That was a fantastic draft pick. And then 2 years later, they drafted Trey Waynes, who turned out to be pretty good for the Vikings, not elite. You look back on the Trey Waynes era, maybe he was a lot better than we thought. We were spoiled on defense. But this team, guess what, needs a cornerback. If they re-sign Byron Murphy, who's now going to cost a Pro Bowler's level, they will have Byron Murphy, hopefully Mekhi Blackman, Dwight McGlothern, Najee Thompson, Reddy Stewart, who's like a practice squad guy, and then some dude they got from the Browns last week. That isn't enough juice, I don't think. They probably need to re-sign Byron Murphy, draft a guy, a cornerback at the 24th pick, have Mekhi Blackman coming back from injury. We shall see how Dwight McGlothern turns out, and then what other depth or undrafted guys they'll sign in the future. I don't know if Shaq Griffin or Stephon Gilmore will be back. Do we really want them back as long-term solutions? Probably not. But like any draft, there are cornerbacks to fill this long-term roster need for the Vikings. And at pick at number 24, you have Siobhan Revell Jr., East Carolina, Benjamin Morrison, who this show has already talked about a lot, from Notre Dame, Jahdae Barron from Texas. He's going to be in this range. And then perhaps later with a trade back, Trey Amos from Mississippi. So, cornerbacks. This is almost as frequent as we request the guard and center boost interior offensive line. Almost as frequently do we expect the Vikings to draft a cornerback. So they can go ahead and fix this if they want in free agency by re-signing Byron Murphy, perhaps signing newcomer free agent DJ Reed. Then you'd kind of cross this need off the board. But if they only re-sign Byron Murphy, they're probably going to need to draft a guy, and this pick, number 24, feels like prime territory for a dude like Benjamin Morrison. All right, my plan tomorrow is to go through some of these guys with Josh Fry, who is our resident draft expert on this show by a mile. See what he likes, see what he doesn't like. We'll see if he's available. That's all I got. The early thinking about the draft. Pick number 24, a long shot, but maybe running back. Certainly offensive line in the interior. I think that is going to be prioritized if you follow the lips of Kevin O'Connell. Interior defensive line, defensive tackle. We've asked for this since Kevin Williams left. That was 11 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. And then cornerback. That will probably end up being the Vikings' keynote offseason priority because they need them. That's all I got today. Skol, baby.